Hello and welcome to tonight's event, Rice, an author talk with Michael Twitty. My name is Trisha Walker. I'm the branch manager of local history and special collections. Tonight, Michael Twitty joins Hannah Risley, reference librarian at Duncan Branch Library, in conversation to discuss his newest book, Rice. As part of tonight's event, Michael Twitty will be answering audience questions. So if you have a question, feel free to ask it using the Q&A box or the chat box. Before we get started, I want to say a quick thank you to the Friends of Duncan Library and the Friends of Local History, and for funding this event. If you're interested in learning more about the Alexandria Friends groups, you can visit alexlibraryva.org/friends. I also want to say a big thank you to Peter Perez and the UNC Press for helping to plan and coordinate tonight's event. And so to get us started, I'd like to welcome our library director, Rose Dawson, to introduce Michael Twitty.
Good evening. My name is Rose Dawson, and I'm the director of the Alexandria Library. And I have the great honor and privilege of introducing Michael Twitty, who is a culinary and cultural historian and creator of the Afroculinaria.com. It's the first blog devoted to African-American historic foodways and their legacy. He has been honored by First We Feast as one of the 20 greatest food bloggers of all time and has been named one of 50 people changing the South by Southern living. Now, Twitty has appeared on NPR's The Splendid Table and Morning Edition, and he has written for The Guardian, Ebony, Local Plate, and The Washington Post. He's given over 300 talks in the US and abroad, including audiences at the Smithsonian, Yale University, the Oxford Symposium on Food and Cooking in England, and the Jerusalem Jewish Film Festival. Now in 2013, he spoke at the MAD Symposium in Copenhagen. And in 2016, he gave his TED Talk. Also in 2016, he received the inaugural Culinary Pioneer Award for Taste Talks and won both Reader's Choice and Editor's Choice Awards. In 2017, he was named the Colonial Williamsburg's first revolutionary in residence. And earlier this year, he was named as part of National Geographic Society's 2021 Emerging Explorer cohort. Now, while the press says his first book, The Cooking Gene, won the 2018 James Beard Foundation Book Award for Book of the Year, we know in Alexandria that actually, because we own his first book, and I don't know if he remembers this, it is Fighting Old Nep, The Foodways of Enslaved Afro-Marylanders from 1634 and 1864. So I just want you to know, Alexandrians have been a huge Twitty fan. This was published in 2009. And not only do we have it in our special collections, but it is an autographed copy. So we keep it under lock and key. So, I'd like to just say that he lives with his husband in that area in Fredericksburg. And so I'd like for you all to please join me in welcoming Michael Twitty.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Michael.
Thank you.
I want to get started with a little bit about your background. For those of you who aren't aware, Michael describes himself as a culinary historian and living history interpreter. Could you tell us a little bit about what is a culinary historian and what is a living history interpreter? How did you get started in this line of work?
I started by reading. I mean, it really is that simple, Hannah. It's like, you know, you cannot go to a program at an academic institution and get a PhD in culinary history. You know why? First thing is because culinary history and food history as we know it, the juicy tidbits that go behind menus and go behind shows on History Channel, it starts in a very strange place. You know, when you learned about food and history beforehand, it was, you know, how much bread did Napoleon deprive people of during the whatever war? It had nothing to do with basic domestic life. And in fact, in many ways, I'm just gonna say it like this. A lot of stories, I mean, I don't want to start on a downer note, but I have to. A lot of stories have been lost. A lot of food narratives have been lost. A lot of, I don't like the word recipe because recipe implies people can read. And through most of human history, most recipes were not passed down by literate people through literate means. But I guess if I say ideas about a food, which is really clunky language, because I don't like saying recipe, because recipe implies that it's a fixed formula. That gets me into trouble a lot because I feel like Black cooking in particular is about feeling, flow, vibe, and vibration. And it's not just because it's not written down. Maybe it wasn't meant to be written down. You see what I'm saying? Maybe it was supposed to be about, okay, I'm teaching you how to do this thing, but you're going to end up doing your own thing anyway. But I need to teach you the basic rules, the skeleton, that the idea is the meat goes on, right? So that's that. But nobody teaches this as an academic thing because it started off in women's studies. Because women academics wanted to honor the knowledge systems that women are central to and have been central to and have primarily passed on. It doesn't mean that cooking just is only a domestic sphere. It's, the idea of women's work. That's not where it's at. The idea is that, most of these ideas about food, no matter what, chefs like Heston Blumenthal, I used to love Heston Blumenthal, so he had to blab the words that the professional kitchen isn't a place for a woman. I'm like, okay, so guess what, boo? You started in a woman and likely gonna be killed by one carrying one of them copper pots or even cast iron if you keep talking that way. So that's how that's gonna work. But I mean, it trickled down from women's studies, and then it kind of like people started to work with culinary history in a just interdisciplinary way. A little history, a little anthropology. In my work in particular, there's a lot of anthropology because I was a cultural anthropology minor at Howard University, African-American studies major. And for all those who read the Washington Post article, I did not drop out. With 3 classes to go, I was priced out. But it just so happens to be that I did my exams and everything. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm good because I got a James Beard Award, 2 of them to put around my neck, so I'm good. But as I was going to say, there's not a major in this, and that's kind of sad actually. There's a positive and negative to it. It's sad because most of us out here who do culinary history and culinary cultural studies, etc., are former accountants, former French teachers. I mean, it really is. I'm like the first generation to be like, nah, I'm gonna bypass the middlewoman and middleman and go straight for the art, which takes a long time. And then historic interpretation is just as complex, but pretty simple. I mean, all of these unique things we created are sort of, I wouldn't say dying, but they're not as prominent as it used to be. So, and it's not as remunerative to go into these fields. But we really do need people to maintain a life in historic interpretation. Let me explain what that is. Historic interpretation is museum work. It is talking about the people of the past, bringing their crafts and their lives and their arts and their skills and their knowledge to life. Sometimes it's first person, which means I'm not speaking as Michael Twitty, I'm speaking as someone who lived in the past. And predominantly it's third person, like myself. I'm a 21st century scholar. I am not, unlike some of the members of the last administration, I am not actually being a slave. So I interpret that. And I mean, for us, I think for people of color, for women, for marginalized people, this is a very important part of our life. And, not all of us live on the East Coast, but here in Virginia, we have an enormous amount of battlefields, historic sites, living history sites, house museums, parks that reflect the natural, cultural, historical heritage of the country in Virginia. Historic reenactment is different. And I often get people think, hey, well, you know, but I often get people who are just like, oh, are you a reenactor? Like, what am I reenacting? Because I don't know. Somebody whose fashion sense is like way out of date. I mean, what am I doing with my 1775 clothes or whatever? No, reenactors and interpreters are both very important. And even with food, it's very important because I mean, everybody thinks that the goal of life was to always eat like well and delicious, and it was always slow cooked and homemade. And if you didn't learn from reenactors and interpreters that no, women in the 18th and 19th centuries in America made pocket soup, which is basically their homemade equivalent of a Knorr cube. And y'all hungry? Okay, cool. There's some potatoes. There's the pocket soup, which is the basically dried up soup that's then reconstituted in water. And then they just kept that pot going from day to day, which doesn't sound great, but actually it's quite sanitary because the water is always at a boil. It's not dirty. It's just the fact it's like keeping a slow cooker on for 3 to 4 days. But I guess the point is that we have these fantasies and nostalgia that people who do reenactment, people who do interpretation, disabuse us of. And reenactors predominantly deal with like war stuff, war period stuff. Civil War, French and Indian War, Revolutionary War, sometimes World War I, World War II, etc. And then interpreters are more like the domestic civilian sphere. And on top of that, I think another difference is that socially, there are cultural and social differences between those two crowds. Reenactor crowd is predominantly more centered to conservative. Interpreter crowd is more centered to progressive. And I think that, you get it. One side's more military, one side's more, dude stuff. Other side is more like, everyday people. Notice I use the proper DMV pronunciation, day, not every day, which, we have to maintain our accent in the face of gentrification. But I guess I use those two parts as tools because being a culinary historian is great, but like, where's your cooking? I can sit here all day and pontificate and tell you facts and all that kind of stuff. The problem is, am I actually cooking and showing you? And for me, it's always been important, especially if you're talking about the lives of enslaved African Americans and free people of color, to not bring to have a kid walk into a room, especially a child of African descent, and they can smell and they can hear and they can see. And then they might say something like, well, that's what, grandma, grandpa, da 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 da. And I remember we went down to where, and they start, the evocation starts. They start evoking all these memories of things that they're seeing in their short time on Earth. And that's important because then they're making the synapses are firing and they're making the connections between this time of life and this. So they're able to, the earlier a kid can do that, the earlier they become a historian. I mean, I did that with my grandparents who were from Virginia and Alabama and South Carolina. I heard them out and not understanding when I was younger that there were all these political and cultural issues that edited the story depending upon the generation. My mother's generation, those who were born outside of the South, or in my mother's case, just beyond it in Cincinnati, you didn't, to be honest with you, a lot of that generation didn't want anything to do with the world their parents came from, and for good reason. And their parents were cagey about what they said about it. And they came from parents who didn't want to talk about the days after the Civil War, and their parents did not want to talk about enslavement. So that's a lot of what was that word? I don't know who said it. I don't know, it was Toni Morrison or someone that used the term in one of the books, disremembering, right? And so when I go in a historic kitchen and I cook, I am pushing back against all the disremembering. Some of it was actually preventative, right? It was for their own mental health, to not rehearse these traumas. And then other times it was just, what are the KIDZ kids called these days? You know, when you're trying to politics, something about politics. The kind of politics when people, I'll just describe it. When people are trying to put on a face and be performative so as not to be perceived as less than or other or strange, you know, they're representing the representation. And, you know, people didn't want to be African, even though clearly you've got when you push back in time, you see those imprints of the motherland. They didn't want to be Southern. They didn't want to be rural, right? At some point, and then now it's like I don't want to be urban, because you know the urban is literally the new black, right? And it's constantly like, so if we're not urban and we're not rural and we're not Southern and we're not African and we're not Caribbean, where is the black left in all that? You know? So the food for me is, so it makes people think through their senses. It brings people back to that vibe and vibration. It brings people back to all that. And I'm sure that I know this is not just us, but that's the point also. You know, being an American, this is so important, Hannah. Being an American means you have the responsibility to absorb every drop of the planet Earth that comes to these borders and these shores. Because that's how we grow. That's the whole purpose. Someone is wasting and forfeiting the beauty and blessings in this troubled land of being an American if they're not saying, okay, my neighbor does that. What can I learn from that? It's part of your responsibility of being in a multicultural democracy. Wow, I gave a sermon, honey. And I had to look at that clock. You are so polite, Hannah. Everybody who is on this call, God bless your little hearts.
Well,
I was going and going and going and going.
You know, I've learned doing a lot of these programs that oftentimes the best thing I can do is to sit back and let things happen. I had one woman on here who interprets historic characters. She came in character as Madam C.J. Walker, and Madam C.J. Walker's great-granddaughter was in the audience, and I put her on and I just let them talk. So and it was great. So my goal is just let it happen. Let what will happen.
Heard.
But you know, I invited you here because you recently published a Savor the South Cookbook, rice, all about rice. I even have already had a couple people write in. Lisa said that, you know, she made some red beans and rice just to eat during your talk tonight. So
wow, beautiful.
I feel it is our duty to talk a little bit about rice tonight.
Yes.
Why did you choose to write about rice? And can you give us a brief history of rice?
Sorry, Felix. I don't know what he's responding to. My blind dog is losing his mind. So here's the deal. The Savor the South series is 20 plus books about different staples in the Southern diet. And I've often joked with Elaine Maisner, the editor at UNC Press. You know, y'all got a book on bourbon. I need to see this bourbon book. I mean, I'm trying to figure out how many bourbon ball recipes can you make, or bourbon ham, or bourbon whatever. But there's ham and there's bacon, which is interesting to me because bacon is, everybody thinks bacon is like the Southern staple. It really isn't. Ham, yes, ham and ham hocks and all that. Bacon, if you talk to the folks who know to know. I don't care if they're Appalachian, I don't care if they're Creole, Cajun, I don't care if they're Low Country, I don't care if they're Chesapeake. Bacon really wasn't, you know, that's a more modern thing. But rice is the last title. And I'm very honored to write it because, you know, I think that Elaine felt, and, you know, that this story, you know, in recent years, we've had so much material. I was on Padma Lakshmi's show, Taste the Nation. We talked about the Gullah Geechee people from whom I have partial ancestry. And also it was on Waffles and Mochi, Michelle Obama show, and again talking about rice. And these stories have been brought out with the knowledge that the rice culture in the United States was started in conjunction with one of the two original sins. One is native removal and land theft, and the other one in genocide. The other one is the enslavement of Africans. And so it's important to like hone in on the fact that these stories haven't been central for centuries. I mean, even though we knew who was growing the rice, and then only recently the knowledge, because Hannah, one of the big issues is, Felix, calm down. One of the big issues is that it was all about enslaved people as machines, bodies but not minds. And here's the deal: I don't need you to be a PhD to understand this. I've been to England, I've been to Scotland, I've been to Ireland. I ain't never seen no rice fields there, but I've been to Africa. I've been to Senegal, I've been to Ceylon, which by the way, I am a citizen of Sierra Leone as of last month, as well as the United States. And I was able to get my citizenship based on the very fact that I had multiple DNA tests to show that my ancestors came from Sierra Leone. They were Mende and Temne and Fula. So, and where they come from, why they come here? Because they were brought here, exiled, enslaved, chained to grow rice in the Americas. And let me put this in some perspective. I did take a little bit more time than other authors of these books to go into some of the history and talk about how it personally relates to me. Because, sure, food, some food can taste good. Not all food tastes good. I actually am a strong proponent of having a nasty cookbook. Because something, I'm Jewish and I'm Black. Both cultures which demand that you eat horrifying food. And it literally happened the other night ago. A friend of mine, I was in New York, a friend of mine was like, "Oh, you got to try this. This is awful." And I said, "Yes, of course." I said, "Now let's just break this down. As Blacks and Jews, we have this ridiculous tradition of going, this tastes awful. You have to eat some. This is terrible. This is nasty." My mother, blessed memory, may she rest in peace and power, she used to say to me, "You gotta taste this. This is nasty. You gotta." I said, "Mom, why do you want me to eat my oppression? Why? No, freedom, liberation from horrible things." I think we should have a cookbook of all horrible things. Rice would not be one of those horrible things. Rice to me is such a incredible staple. For me, I grew up, like I said, partially South Carolinian. My Virginia folks did not think rice was like a thing. Like my Virginia folks thought corn and sweet potatoes were a thing, and white potatoes. That was the big three if you were from Virginia. Rice was sometimey. But South Carolina, definitely, I never forget walking into my grandfather's house of blessed memory. And I mean, let me tell you something. I saw these big, I'd never seen bags that big of any food in my life. And these huge bags of rice that were weighed more than I did, surprisingly enough. I was a skinny girl back then. And like that rice was heavy and it was present. I didn't know you could eat that much rice. And then now for me, if I don't have rice at least 2-3 times a week, I feel like I haven't eaten, which is a very interesting phrase because you go to Cambodia, you go to Vietnam, you go to Senegal, you go to Sierra Leone, you go to India, you go to China, and they say the same phrase. The word rice is synonymous with, have you had dinner? Padma told me that in Tamil, one of the major cultures and languages of South India, the expression for is dinner ready is, has the rice been put on the table yet? So there's this singularity about all of us in this global, in the global South and beyond, who eat and enjoy rice. And I think it's because rice has been woven into the stories about the ancestors. And for those of us who are African American, if you've done your DNA and it's come out Mende or Temne on your mother's side, well, there's a reason for that. The majority of the people who were brought from those ethnic groups were the women. Why the women? Because the women were the ones who were growing the rice, fanning and winnowing the rice. If you've ever seen the rice fanners from the Carolinas or from Africa, the big baskets that are round that were used. And I got to tell you something, to see those baskets used in their proper context in Africa, it was fascinating because it wasn't just like this, you can imagine it's like, okay, da 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 da, and the wind blows away the chaff. I saw this woman in a Mandinka village in Sierra Leone, literally to take that basket, and I mean the gentle movements of the hand, and it was so accurate down to the last grain in that basket as she moved it around. I would have had rice flying all over the place. When they, pound the rice, the word is malitu, which you can even hear the onomatopoeia. Malitu, malitu, right? So the word for rice is malo, to beat, right? So tum. There's like the word in Eastern Nigeria is odo. So you hear that the onomatopoeia of the pestle, and that's music, right? Because it's not just about the rice itself, it's about the fact that, you wake up in the morning and you have like the rice cakes that they make, and then the evening it's the rice with the stew with the fish or whatever you have, or the greens or whatever you have. And then the day is punctuated in the morning and afternoon by the sound of the women using the mortar and pestle, often together, and it's a percussive sound. And then sometimes there's lullabies, and sometimes there's like little songs they will sing, or things they make up. And so you talk to our kids and you say, okay, what does that sound like? Music with rhythmic music with rhyming and improvised songs. Sound familiar? And then sometimes they'll sometimes it gets very bawdy when they start singing certain songs about their marriage or men. And then other times they encourage the little kids to kind of like play around, and the little kids will start clapping as the women are doing the and they'll and that's how the kids learn too, because little girls can't wait to show off and show their mothers that they know how to do without spilling the grain everywhere. And the little boys are funny because in Africa, little kids are not penalized for being little kids and having movement. The difference is that there, it's nothing to have the adults hand out a few things, and then all of a sudden these kids are making musical instruments out of nothing, right? And all of a sudden they're just like their elders. I mean, it's a fast. There's no training there. It's just strictly them listening and hearing and watching, and then touching. And then one day, they've got their little rattles and they've got their little buckets and their little sticks. And these are the same boys who will turn into the young men who have the energy and drive to play at the harvest festivals. And to see the amount of rice in a pot. And then there's not just the rice that we know, there's the original rice that was grown in Africa that is 4,000 years old. So these women who are coming over to America in slave ships are literally like bringing over almost 5,000 years of knowledge about how to grow rice. And then beyond that, Southern rice was not just related to the Low Country or Louisiana. Of course, 1719, the French authorities, colonial authorities, tell the people in the slave trade, we want Africans and a barrel of rice. So they knew who was growing what and why. And then that becomes, of course, the bedrock of Louisiana cuisine, South Louisiana cuisine, at least. And then, of course, later on, people are growing rice all over. Rice was found in Eastern Shore of Maryland, Southern Maryland. It was found in Middle Tennessee, the Bluegrass Country, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, not in the coast, but on the plain, Arkansas, Florida, Missouri. And that's because there were different kinds of rice. It wasn't just the rice that grows in the swamp or whatever. And then, of course, rice is extremely versatile. You have the rice pudding and of course the very plebeian sugar and rice. I had to include it in the cookbook because I was like, well, some of us, that was breakfast, or having rice cakes or rice fritters. They're called kala in New Orleans, and they're based on akara from West Africa.
Do you have a favorite?
A favorite rice dish? Red rice. And it's because, I guess now we call it red rice. When I was growing up, one of the many Southern terms for was Spanish rice. Ain't nothing Spanish about it. It's the country cousin to jollof rice. And you can actually even see in your mind's eye, people in different parts of Brazil make their rice with tomatoes and peppers a certain way. And then people in Mexico, of course, what we call Mexican rice is the Afro-Mexican version of the same dish. Because where that rice dish originated was Veracruz, which was the main port for the slave trade in Mexico. And the people who are being brought over are from Senegambia. So Senegal, Gambia, you move down the coast to Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, then you hit Sierra Leone and Liberia, and part in the western half of Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. That is the predominant rice-growing region. And those are the same people who end up going to the Arbanite region in Haiti, the same people who end up going into northern Brazil and northeast Brazil. They're the same people who end up going to different pockets of Jamaica and Cuba. And predominantly, I mean, culinary historians, because they were very myopic, no ableist language there. I didn't mean it that way. It was plain to see that they saw this all driven by the Europeans. When the reality is that the rice that the Caribbean folks were eating was being grown in the mainland countries and shipped in. They didn't want to grow anything other than sugarcane and maybe tobacco, cocoa, things like that in the islands. They didn't really devote a lot of time to growing food crops. That's why everything was so expensive. They had to bring everything in. But nevertheless, all people of the African Atlantic love their rice and beans, right? So we have rice and beans in Haiti and Louisiana. Obvious connection there because Haiti and Louisiana were connected historically and culturally. We have the rice dishes we already described across the Americas, but we have feijoada in Brazil. If I told you that I'm going to take you to a barbecue with a lot of spices and hot pepper and hot sauce, where I have collard greens and rice and beans, you ain't taking, what's so exotic about that until I tell you it's from Brazil, right? And so just hearing that, just seeing those obvious connections. Then of course, throughout the Caribbean, pickup rice and rice and peas and rice. It is hilarious to be in a room with folks from Barbados, from one of my ancestral homelands of Trinidad and Jamaica, and they're all arguing about, is it rice and peas? The peas are rice. And then it's like, what kind of peas do you eat with it? Puerto Rican guandules, pigeon peas, which are all over the Caribbean and South America. And we're grown here, but they passed out of the diet. Bottom line is that we have Hoppin' John, South Carolina. We have jambalaya congrete. So jambalaya wasn't just the thing people know with the chicken or seafood. It was also with black-eyed peas. And jambalaya congrete was basically the same recipe as Hoppin' John in South Carolina. Okay, and then of course there were rice breads and rice cake, like rice pancakes and rice waffles. And this, so expanding into the European influence, right? Those recipes. And so rice is such a versatile food. And then we can't forget that immigrant communities have brought their own rice dishes over time through the South. So for example, the VA Cajun food tradition, I shouldn't say trend, tradition, where you have Vietnamese who are now 2-3 generations in Louisiana and coastal Texas, mixing all these foods up. Well, the rice is the star of the table. Different Southern Latin communities. Look at my friend Sandra Gutierrez's cookbook about the Southern Latin table. And then the Kurdish community in Tennessee and beyond, the Cuban community with Moros y Cristianos in Florida. Of course, the Haitian community in Miami as well, and on and on and on and on. We have all of these cultures and people that use rice to define what they think of as good eating.
I have an audience question here from Dina. You talked a little bit about this, but a couple people have asked. So most Americans, we suspect, probably identify rice with Asian cooking. And Dina wanted to know, what are some fundamental African rice dishes? You've touched a little bit on that, but both Dina and another viewer would like to know, are there nutritional differences between different types of rice?
Yes, there are. Absolutely. African rice is really, really good. The problem is that it simply, a lot of the crops that are indigenous are also very attuned to the ecosystems and the climate. And everybody's favorite 2 words for the next however long we last as human beings, climate change is real. It's not just, okay, well, it snowed in July someplace, so therefore. No, these things affect human traditions and agriculture, and so things that help people survive. Also, think about the impact of colonialism. You know, France had Vietnam and other parts of Asia, and also had Senegal at the same time. Guess what they're doing? They were bringing in rice from off to displace the economy of people growing their own rice. That was a huge thing with colonialism. Undermine people's ability to provide for themselves, grow their own thing. But it's not about personal care. It's about also tradition. You know, one of the, I can't remember her name at the moment, but one of the great heroes of African culture in Senegal was a woman from one of the ethnic groups that I have ties to. And she demanded that her people only eat the homegrown rice. Because she said, your ancestors eat this rice. And with your ancestors go the traditions. If you eat the colonial rice, we're going to start forgetting our history. You're also going to start eating something that's not healthy for you. This is before nutrition and vitamins, all that. She just said, this is not good for us. This is good for us. The French end up exiling her, but guess what? It is still, it was Jola. That's right. She was Jola. And in the South, in Casamance. And the people were like, no, we're not giving up our rice. And you know that when I went there, right before the country closed down the pandemic, our country at least, I remember I was in that area of Africa, Senegal, where she was from. And you know that rice is still being grown, still being eaten. And there are still shrines to the ancestors where they will only put that rice. So what she did was very revolutionary, because you had in Africa, you have rice that goes along with dishes like cheboujen. It literally means cheb, rice, jen, fish. Rice and fish. They also have chebuniebe. Chebuniebe is black-eyed peas. So cheb, rice and black-eyed peas. The same dish that becomes hop and john in one place, jambalaya congri in the other, it becomes rice and peas in the Caribbean. I mean, it's because point blank, all facts included. This is about where the boat picked us up, more than is where it dropped us off. It's about the unity and unification of all these stories. And, you know, in Africa, you can find rice fritters just like in Louisiana. I wonder why. But also, rice becomes a basis for things like munko. Munko is like a sweet rice cake. So think about like our rice cakes, but like little sugar. These are made for children, and also made for people at things like naming ceremonies. Also, rice can be as simple as, you know, rice and palm oil and pepper, which is, think of that as the equivalent of us putting salt, pepper, and butter in a pot of cooked rice. And then of course there's jollof rice. You know, the most arguable, just like rice and peas in the Caribbean is a basis for argument. Whose jollof rice is better? And since I'm part Ghanaian, Nigerian, and Sierra Leonean, I have no comment, because I will get assassinations, requests, threats at my home. How could you do this to your people? I'm like, well, you're all my people. Che. So I'm not going to mess with that. But I do know that in my own experience, Ghanaian rice tends to run a little browner, Nigerian rice a little redder. There are jollof rice dishes where you throw in all the kitchen sink, and there's jollof rice dishes where it's very strict on being just tomato, the pepper, and the onion. When I say pepe, I do not mean che. I don't mean it's pepe you have in America. I mean like the pepe that will burn your mouth off. That pepe. And so yeah, it's beautiful, and it's one dish that I actually make. My red rice, if you're asking, my red rice, and you didn't, but my red rice and my jollof rice, even though they have a similar vibe, they're not the same. Even though the basic ingredients are tomato, bell pepper, hot pepper, and onion. it's not like I literally forced myself to make sure that so for example, the red rice has kosher lamb bacon in it. Which would be pork bacon, this one or sausage, which is very popular in the low country. My jollof rice is like a neutral oil or peanut oil, then you get the vegetables in there. And then I do two versions. One is I cook the rice in a tomato heavy stock. The other version is very, very contemporary African. You take all the vegetables, the tomato, the onion, the pepper, all that, and you blend it and you cook the rice in that blended sauce. It's a completely different reaction with the food. It's not quite, it's not quite the same, but they're both delicious, I assure you.
In that answer, you talked a little bit about where the boat dropped you off, and you've touched a little bit about the role of how slavery shaped Southern cuisine, but I'd like to switch gears a little bit, not a lot, but culinary injustice. It's something you've talked a lot about, you've written about it. For those in the audience who have never heard this term before, what is culinary injustice and how has it impacted your work?
So it's two different things: culinary justice, culinary injustice. So culinary injustice, what does that look like? It looks like this. When we talk about food justice, a term which is much more broad, right? It means that people have a human right to healthy, nutritious food, sustainably. So not just when people, it's an afterthought. It is it's part of learning when you're little. It's part of aging in a healthy way. It's part of running around out here and not getting that Rona, other than having a mask and a shot. It's part of every aspect of our lives. Okay, but that food could be anything. Doesn't have to be, I can give you the carrots or give you access to the carrots or have you grow the carrots. But what kind of carrot, where they come from, where they fit into your unique culture, diet, and history, and your legacy is all up to you. Now, then there's culinary injustice and culinary justice. So we will often see articles more and more talking about appropriation in food, talking about other issues with food. And I know a lot of people sort of like, shake their head. And I guess I used to be really I was, a proponent of talking about culinary justice, which means it's not the food, but the ideas about the food, the recipes, the cultural context of the food. Like, for example, when some restaurant in Manhattan thought it was a great idea to make a chopped cheese sandwich on a menu that cost $20. Chopped cheese is a bodega sandwich that was invented in Black and brown communities. They may not be able to afford that Big Mac, but they were able to all buy into that chopped cheese on a hero, split it up, and y'all have lunch. I come from the generation after the generation where if you went to a sandwich place, good luck having that whole sandwich to yourself. Literally, the knife came out of that bag, and it might be this set, but you get in half. And if there's four of you, guess what? You're getting 4 quarters. And just so the idea that people come up with these things. I never forget, I had an activist say to me one time, I'm a little bit, bland on this culinary justice thing you keep talking about because I think it's rather elitist. And I said to her point blank, I said, if somebody jacks your rice and beans, that's all you got. You do need some culinary justice. Because we know that there are comfort foods and there are mama foods and traditional foods and other foods that have come down to us that taste good, that are very fulfilling, but then someone will come along and try to upgrade it. And upgrade it means they want that whole paycheck money. And that's not, I guess that's one element, but the other element is, what about the people in those communities for whom those foods are really important? Why not let them have the opportunity to empower themselves? Not $20, but I've been in many communities that, quite frankly, you don't go to another community for this and that. You go to them, and you get it at a fair price, and you pay for the craftsmanship that goes into it. And I think that's what culinary justice really is about. It's about acknowledging the origins of things, respecting. A friend of mine, Tanya Hopkins, was just availing me about how the ice cream industry and how Campbell's soup, there are Black stories and Black people hiding behind all these different pieces. But you don't see that or hear it because those stories aren't told. And furthermore, it comes to the point where people are sort of distance or disassociate those foods and traditions from the people who started them. And so that what it means is people don't see a role for you when you are the origin story. So, I imagine a world of culinary justice where, we talk about inspiration rather than claiming that we have a version of that food out of respect. But also, I think people get it wrong. I think they confuse appropriation with cultural diffusion. Cultural diffusion is what happens in a healthy multicultural society. Regardless of all the boundaries that we put up, people will find a way to mix ideas, to mix dishes, and to mix with each other. I mean, it's hilarious. Like, we don't know how this dish got here. Really? Really, boo? You don't know how it got there? It got there because people share thoughts and they share ideas, they share food. People cheat. It's like everybody says to me, well, how did this dish get into Jewish food if it's not kosher? How do you think? Somebody somewhere, when somebody wasn't looking, went, okay, let me hook this up. And that's basically, that's why culinary history is so important. It's because these are the stories of how we are human race. It shows you that the boundaries don't really matter at the end of the day because they're going to be left over if there's something useful and important to be had. And so for me, it's like, do we acknowledge where our inspirations come from? Are we giving people in marginalized and oppressed communities the opportunity to make a living from these niche parts of their culture? The seeds, the heirloom plants, the heritage breed animals that are associated with their cuisine. What are we doing? That's where that is centered. It's centered in the idea that culinary stuff, ideas about food, the culture around cuisine is also a space where social justice and cultural awareness is extremely important.
I'd like to go to another audience question now. Leslie, who just retired from our local history special collections department, so happy to see she's still joining us for events. She writes, "Thank you for the work you do. African-American cooking is nearly always associated with the South. How do we honor New England and Western influences?"
So we have to talk about the fact that, well, 90% of us have Southern roots, those of us who are African-American whose roots go back to the beginning of this country. And I say that in that very precise way because there are those of us, like I just learned, like myself, whose Caribbean roots are not recent, who are historic. There are those of us who have these ties to Afro-Latin descendants in other places. Okay, great. And then those of us who have this historical link with America. And for us, 90% of those folks are Southern. Now, this is where it gets really fun and interesting. We've always been a migratory people. And us more than anyone else. And somebody say, well, everybody might, no, sweeties. Black folks have the largest forced migration in American history called the domestic slave trade. And Black folks also have the largest willing voluntary migration called the Great Migration. And that's not even including African and Caribbean immigration to this country. It's not even including the number of people who said, to hell with this, I'm no more auction block for me. I'm running away. I'm going to become a freedom seeker. I mean, that alone, I'm so sorry, but even before the Great Migration, whenever in history did you see such a thing? So there's all this movement of Black folks from place to place. And what's really exciting and important is that we talk about the fact that Black stories are not static. They're dynamic. You know, Viola Davis talks about, you know, being from New England. You know, there are narratives of Black food in New England going back to the very beginning of New England history. You know, we were tavern owners and we were restaurateurs and we were certainly oystermen and fishermen. We were cooks. You know, I remember being in San Francisco and Mrs. Abby Fisher's house was the same building I was in. And I was like, whoa, Abby Fisher came from South Carolina to Alabama, then went to San Francisco and had this amazing pickling and bakery business. Who wrote one of the first Black cookbooks, What Mrs. Fisher Knows About Old Southern Cooking. And we were the people on the cattle trails. 1/3 of the cowboys were of African descent. So the cattle trails were Texas to Wyoming to Montana. The Civil War brought Black cooks all over the country. So we really have to understand these histories and they're complicated too, because in New England alone, you have the Black folks who were brought there through the slave trade. Yeah, Black folks who came there because they were seeking their freedom. During the 18th and 19th centuries, you have Black folks who came during the Great Migration. You have Black folks who came from Cape Verde, the islands off the coast of Africa, where the Portuguese culture was there, and Afro-Portuguese culture. You have Black folks from the Caribbean coming up to Boston. That's where you get Malcolm X from, right? His mother was from Grenada. All that stuff. You have all these pieces together, right? You have African immigration. So you have these, and then you have people who are going back and forth, north to south, south to north. And you have all those layers in Boston and in Providence and beyond, Philadelphia. Same, very similar narrative, even though Philadelphia was very much attached to the culture of the Chesapeake, right? Because of their neighbors. You know, so there's all these layers are there. So I want someone to be that hero of that history. I've been encouraging young Black food writers, get the stories of the generation that's living right here and now down now. Use that Zoom, use that phone, write down the notes, record this. There's no book for them. So the Great Migration generation and the 2 generations after it, those generations need their stories recorded. They need their recipes recorded. I have to say this before we run out of time. There's an exhibit that I was involved with called about sugar. And what got me was when I went to the museum, the beautiful gallery on campus they had, and saw one part of the exhibit was birthday cakes. And it was illustrated by a photo album full of pictures of people celebrating birthdays, but they were without name, without the people. And I just thought, this is, for an empath like me, was extremely difficult. Because I'm looking at some of these pictures and I know that that's the only picture left of that person in his life. And so that's what I'm trying to say, is that I don't want us to get to that level where it's a bunch of miscellaneous stuff that we now have to recodify and refigure out. As good as we are at improvisation, we ain't that good. We need to have, and that goes for everybody on this call. I mean, if you care about your family's food traditions, if you care about those recipes, please don't be that cliche. Oh, grandma died, or so-and-so died, or uncle so-and-so, and we could have got the recipe, but it's not about getting the recipe, it's about getting the experience and the life knowledge of that person. You know, it's a big and over and beyond. First of all, it's never going to taste the same. Stop lying to yourself. It will the soul and the spirit and the energy of that person is the missing ingredient. So it's your job to invest it with your energy. And then watch this language. Make room for the next generation's energy so they can make it their own. The very process of, as we say in Hebrew, lador vador, generation, it's not about what's on the paper, it's about what's in you. That's the beauty. And so we have to do that work. We have to record stories that nobody's heard before. We have to get all the details. The great Edna Lewis, daughter of the Commonwealth of Virginia and the South's, they said the South's answer to Julia Child once said, leave no stone unturned. That's all, leave no stone unturned.
Thank you for that. We are at the end of our hour and I want to be respectful of your time, but I'd love to ask you one last question.
Sure.
This is another audience question, comes from Lisa. It was the first question submitted, but I knew I had to use this one to go out on, and that is, what are you working on now?
Ha, very nice. I'm amazed that Felix has stayed this quiet this time. I want to give everybody a little glimpse of Felix. Hold on. There's Felix. Hey,
Oh.
Felix. So anyhow, I'm working on Kosher Soul, finishing that. It's taken me a minute. It's taken me a longer time than the cooking gene, even though the cooking gene was my whole life. Kosher Soul has this one too. I'm talking about being Black and being Jewish and food. Learning the food of other, as we say in Hebrew, midot, which are communities within Judaism. We're people, first and foremost. We're not necessarily a religion. That may be odd for some people, but we're not a faith. Two of us together is always going to be, we say the phrase, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. I would say 10. And I'm looking at the foods of Jews of African descent. I'm looking at the foods of Southern Jews of all colors. I'm looking at the ways in which the rudimentary soul food of both communities is very similar but very different. And also attitudes towards the food as well. And just what it means to be a diaspora peoples creating food in migration and movement. So all the above. And also part of my personal journey, my culture journey, my peoplehood journey, my faith journey, and my intellectual journey in Judaism and Jewish peoplehood. So that's what that's going to be. And then I'm also working, the next thing in the till for the next conceivable few years is I'm doing a cookbook with Fiden. They do big, beautiful Bible cookbooks. So I'll be doing their Bible of Southern cooking. Hey, you get ready to make room on your bookshelf. But I'm really excited about that because there's going to be an adventure for me because it's going to be very, very strict, accurate cookbook work. But it's also going to be more cultural material, it's high time because these big books about Southern food are rarely written by us folk. And I want to take the opportunity to just, it's not just about highlighting Black contributions or Black food. It's also about being able to see the links and saying, there we were, Black in German and Scots Irish and Cherokee and Appalachia. And there we were, Black and Sephardic Jewish and French Huguenot and this and that in the Low Country. You get where I'm going with that? This idea that we are these, it's not this apartheid version of history that we often get, where the stories are separated into these subcategories, but it's acknowledging that is a world we made together. And for that world to persist, we have to still be together. We can have a lot of respect and dignity and boundaries for our own culture and own people. That's very important. And we should also have a space where we can talk about food. We can use food to heal issues that some people don't want to be healed. And we can grow together. That's the meaning of life for me, is that we everybody is a book. In my world, everybody is a cookbook.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I thank you so much for spending your Monday night with us, Michael. I really appreciate having you here. And thank you to our library director, Rose, and our local history special collections manager, Trisha, for joining us here tonight. This was a collaboration between the Friends of Duncan Library and our Friends of Local History Special Collections, who were able to come together to make this program happen. My next webinar event will be on August 11th, where we'll host Dr. Ladale Winling from Virginia Tech to talk about his research on racial segregation in the US real estate market. So if you have any interest in that, I encourage you all to join us. Thank you to our audience for spending your Monday with us. And Michael, do you have any final words for our audience?
Absolutely. Start recording, talking, and researching now. As my grandmother and mother would say, don't wait on ceremony. Do the work for your own sake. And most of all, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just about it's about the fact that you are communing with people and helping them get the people that have gone on or gone away. And it's also about bringing the generations together. Make sure that your young people are in that room to do the cooking, to hear the stories. Find a way to get everybody together as much as you can, even with our limitations that we have right now, to really learn the traditions and pass them on. And know that they're going to change and grow, because that's what being human is about. That's all I got to say. All right, guys. Thank you, Alexandria family. I appreciate you.
Thank you so
Keep
much.
that book on lockdown, Ms. Rose.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful night.
Good night. See y'all later.